rich human interest story of Hollywood is filled with happiness and despair, joy and tragedy, a crazy quilt of madness, sanity, laughter and tears, the desperate struggle to reach the top and the battle to remain there.
My name is Vivian Kerr, and this is Conversations with Actors.
How did you start getting interested in acting?
Well, I think my answer might be the opposite of a lot of people you talk to, because I spent a long time trying to figure out how I could do anything but acting. I had one of those majors in college where you're stalling a little bit. I think of an English major as that, because you could be 70 things with an English major.
Yeah.
But I was always in plays, and I guess it just took me a minute to feel like I could build a life I could respect around it.
Are your parents are they artists at all?
Yeah. Well, it's funny how in my family it seems to divide up along gender lines. You know, the men seem to be doctors and lawyers, and the women seem to be in the arts. It's not true. It's not true across the board. Yeah, that does seem to work out well for both sides of the equation, because, you know, I think there's a contribution in a relationship made by the one who's in a creative field, even if the one who's not in a creative field is living it vicariously. Everybody needs a creative outlet. So I know my father, who was a psychoanalyst, was also in a way a frustrated pianist. I mean, he played beautifully as an amateur pianist, and he loved that my mother was a concert pianist. And even though the financial burden was on him, he got so much out of having this beautiful musician in the home and making the home a beautiful place to live, not just through her music, but, you know, her sense of feng shui, color, design. You know, she could make the home a lovely place to be. And so there was a real balance between them for a good long time. There would even be concerts set up in our house with many folding chairs, and I grew up around that celebration of the arts, I guess you would say, was very much. And going back a generation, my grandfather, who had been a surgeon, this is on my mother's side, had married a woman who was in a way an unrealized poet, but quite a poet. I mean, she wrote her poetry and put it in a drawer, but after her death, my grandfather posthumously published a book of her works, and I think she was extraordinary.
What's her name?
Marilyn Joslet was her maiden name, and she married Dr. Harold Laufman, so it became Laufman. So I mean, there are female lawyers in the family, but I seem to have sort of. My brother is an attorney for the Justice Department, and I am an actress. So I do think, though, that my father being a psychoanalyst and his mother being a psychoanalyst before him, that had I not been an actor, that might have been an interesting road for me to explore. I do think in some ways a similar kind of person is drawn to that profession. I mean, often there's, I don't want to stereotype us all, but there's something that needs a lot of work from childhood, and you do that work in your individual ways. You know, I think people who go into psychiatry, psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, whatever, as a profession, part of what's involved in the training is a lot of self-work, and that's also true for an actor. So I think people are drawn to it who sometimes need to do that work or are deeply driven to do that work. So it's a similar kind of personality type, you know. And there's a similar amount of damage in evidence. If you really peel back a layer of who's sitting across the couch from you or whatever, it's there's often a lot of baggage there that's been worked with and worked through or not, depending on the practitioner. So.
And so you graduated with an English degree, and then you went to NYU for grad school. Is that right?
That's right. I was a bit back foot about it. Like, I applied to 3 schools, all of which I thought, well, that will give me a really good start as an actor, and I got into one of them. So I went to NYU.
Where did you apply?
So the other was, actually applied to Yale and RADA, as opposed to Juilliard, which would have been a natural choice. I don't know why. I was like, the third one needs to be the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, but but why not? And I just did do a job in England and thought, this is the life for an actor. Yeah. It's really, and for anybody. I mean, it's a really wonderful place to be culturally.
So when you went to NYU, did you feel like that your other classmates there were ahead of you in terms of their experiences, or no? Because
in which sense do you mean ahead of me in their experiences? Did you
feel like maybe they had, because I know a lot of people go to grad school
after being in the world for a while?
Yeah, so did you
It was a lot of people who'd gone straight through, actually.
Oh, okay.
So it was people with similar experiences to mine. I mean, there were a couple, not exactly in my year, but within the school when I got there, who had some time off to be professional actors and who came in, with what was then very impressive. They'd have a SAG card or an equity card, and I'd think, oh, God, how does a person get that? But most people had come straight out of college that were in my year. So there wasn't a sense of being behind like that. I mean, I think we were quite various in my class in terms of temperament. I mean, people were very different from each other. There were a lot more men than women, and there was a real fraternal sense among the guys, and the women were extremely different from one another, so we didn't do that typical... There wasn't that typical thing that was in some other years where the women all sort of formed a little troupe as well. But it was a really... I mean, it was a great training program. My God, I really lucked out. It had a wonderful collection of people, especially at that time. I mean, it's still a wonderful program now. But Paul Walker, who's no longer living, was our one of our teachers, and I think of him. People use the word too easily, but I think of him as a genuine genius. He really was. It was a games class, and it was sort of a transcendent thing. Things would happen in that room that still feel like they happened by magic, like I don't quite know how. We all started to feel like we were thinking with a collective brain, and stuff would just bubble up out of us. And I guess what I learned most in that class was just that potential exists among us when we're acting, and that nobody's actually ever acting alone. That's the lie, is like, oh, look at that performance, because we give awards and we think of acting in that way. I think we look at this or that actor's performance in isolation, and the fact is nobody's any more true than the dynamic between them and the person they're sitting across from or acting with in a scene. We're all incredibly mutually dependent. Sometimes someone will just get so lost inside of a character that they could almost be in an isolation chamber and something would still be sort of glorious to watch. But mostly what we respond to is a dynamic or a chemistry between the actors who are working. So that class was all about the magic of that energy for me. And he somehow brought it out in all of us. I can't even call it a method. It was like he was kind of lit up as a teacher around just the right sort of events that were happening to sort of make those events grow. And great directors are like that too. They can just feel what is happening and know how to sort of turn the heat up under the good parts of it and make them manifest even more than they are. But it's a very subtle art, really.
I was going to say, I prefer directors who just direct through shame and fear.
Sometimes that works, whatever works. I don't know. People are driven by very different things.
I just have the whip crack. I like to feel like I'm disappointing Daddy.
Amazing the number of actresses that do function that way, trying to please some version of Daddy. Yeah.
And I get it, but it also... there's no joy in it for that. I don't know. For me, I just think it's uncomfortable and sad. To be around that. It's like, oh.
It can be very motivating too. I don't know that we need to be as sort of fearful of our dark sides as we often are. It's kind of people get kind of hooked into what they're doing for very different reasons. And sometimes the very stuff that feels like it's your obstacle becomes your friend when you're in the midst of working on something difficult. I don't know. It's Gertrude Stein once said, "Genius is the art of making a virtue out of your weaknesses." But there really is some truth to it. I think people will say, this is my obstacle, and get mired in that kind of thinking. And sometimes the very thing that you seem to be the slave of psychologically can be the very thing that if you go with it rather than against it can kind of open you up. Mm-hmm. I've found.
Is there ever been a moment when you've been working on a project where you're preparing a script at home or you're in rehearsals maybe for a play and you feel like it's not going well, you've felt very, very blocked or very, those moments where you're like, I'm going to have to quit this. Mm. And if that's ever happened to you, how have you kind of worked through it?
Well, there are so many different, I could answer that question so many different ways because, some of it is just about the right blend of temperaments working on a certain project. It's, and you can just be in hell because you're temperamentally oil and water with somebody, but it doesn't mean that work's going to be bad at the end of the day. You can suffer and still make something good. And you can be having a great old time and still make something sort of meh. It's not really a predictor of outcome, how you're feeling while you're making something. So I do think you kind of have to keep your head down and move through it as best you can, because there's a great mystery to what makes... you hear stories. I understand Jessica Lange was miserable making Frances, for example, and what a great, great movie that was. And you hear those kind of stories all the time. I try, therefore, to not judge while I'm in process, if at all possible. It's hard sometimes, because if you're suffering, you want to figure out how to end it. And sometimes people will think it's not worth it, no matter what. I haven't ever gotten to that point myself. But maybe that's something, too, with age. People get into a mentality, life is too short for this. And one reason why I've done, 4 or 5 films by first-time filmmakers where it's a huge gamble is that I kind of like the intensity and sense of risk and possibility of things to go wrong in a first feature with somebody who's new. Because inside of that kind of chaos or danger of a first big effort, a first big investment like that, there's great possibility for something new to come about, rather than that kind of well-oiled machine feeling where you sort of know how you're supposed to fit in and, when to open your mouth and when not to and what your role is. And, I kind of like the wild experiment of it all. If the material is good, obviously, if the material is
there
strong.
Seems to be such a difference between if you're working on an independent film and when you're working on, like a TV show. And sometimes I think, and I understand why, but sometimes I think that these bigger budget things, it's like so polite and so structured. And
there's a lot to learn about how to be within the ecosystem of a project that has a lot of money attached to it, because the rules are different. And if you're sort of green and going into an experience like that, you might, especially if you're just out of school where everybody's giving each other feedback all the time, and you might not realize exactly what's expected of you. And I'm still learning that, because some of the things that are required to me sometimes feel like they fly in the face of doing the best possible work. More often than not, you shouldn't say anything, rather than you should open your mouth if you're thinking or feeling this or that. More often, time is money, and you're supposed to find a way to efficiently move through your day and keep things efficient for other people, and it's a big team of people, and so a lot of problem solving needs to be done more on your own. If something is hugely important, you can bring it to the director, but you really need to choose your moments to do that, because the director is thinking about 70,000 other things.
He's like, no, we're not
including there are many notes usually from a network, that writers and director and so forth are trying to follow some kind of marching orders themselves, so they can't just make some kind of executive decision in the moment that might solve your issue, because they'd have to run it by 7 other people. So just being aware of how big a thing like that is when you're in it is really important, so that you don't just gum up the works and frustrate yourself and other people.
To that point, how much of your work do you feel like you do at home before you show up on day one, and how much of it do you feel like you find with the director or find with the other actors on the day?
It's so project dependent. Because I'm heady myself, if the character's in a body that's in a very different experience than I would normally be in, sometimes I have to just do a bunch of stuff to put myself in my body and out of my head, so that my body will sort of take over and take me there. So obviously you're constructing something with your mind that is a set of exercises to put your body through, to put you in a space where your body will take over. So it does start with a set of ideas about what your body might need. It's like a relationship between the brain and the body. One of the questions I saw when I read over your list of possible questions, no, but it's wonderful, was something about what might you say to your 18-year-old self, right? You said, what would you say? And this is a little tangential, but I was told early in my acting training that my mind was sort of my enemy, and I actually don't think that's true.
It's nice to hear you say that, because I think
a lot of young actors are
like, get out of your head.
Yes, get out of your head.
As if you can.
Well, and also as if that's desirable. And sometimes I think the reason that British actors are often given so many of the plum character parts that we see in film, TV, is they're actually not trained that way. They're not told your intellect is your enemy. And, it's just a very different theatrical tradition there, I guess. And people go into theater who come out of the top institutions, academic institutions. I think watching someone genuinely think their way through a problem, there's almost nothing more interesting on screen than that. Watching the brain at work as somebody's committed to being in the situation of the character and trying to problem solve as the character. It's just wonderful to watch a mind thinking, and yes, feelings, but feelings attendant upon, the work of the mind are also sort of more interesting than feelings divorced from that process. Kind of just, it becomes this sort of emotive, empty acting. So I think I would say to my younger self, don't be afraid of this aspect of yourself, befriend it, but find a way to bring your body in, always bring your body in, because the mind can be sort of ingenious at keeping the body safe from having to have an experience. We're good at tricking ourselves and keeping ourselves sort of inured to what's going on emotionally.
Self-protecting.
Yeah, it's a lot of... it's one of the liabilities of being sort of egg-headed, is that you can sort of create a scrim between you and the world, and you're not really in your life, and you don't even know you've done it to yourself. A lot of writers suffer from that. They feel like they're just watching all the time. So anyway, I don't know how I got off on this, but what was the first question before I went to your question about?
That's so interesting, and frankly, applicable to me.
Is it?
Because I think I'm pretty heady, but I'm also very emotions become very easy for me. So I've been rewarded a lot because people get very impressed if you can cry or whatever, So people pat you and go, "Oh, you're so vulnerable."
A little too much of that, I think, in this country.
I think so. I'm just a crying robot,
a wonderful character actress I know, Amy Ryan. I don't know her well, but she once nicknamed herself in her early career before she started to sort of break through. Amy Cryan Ryan, because she was so brilliant at just being able to pull that out when required. I mean, it's funny, those early guest spots, and it is that thing of like, who can turn on the waterworks for that scene in the Law and Order episode where you're on the stand and you need to break down. I mean, it's terrible to me that that's what's so often required, especially of actresses, much more so than actors. But so I'm now remembering what your first question was, which was about preparation. That's what led me down this very strange avenue to what I would say to my 18-year-old self. Deadwood was my first sort of big on-screen job. I had mostly done theater before that. And I think of acting school in a way as having provided a sort of grab bag of things you could sort of pluck out and use for different purposes. For Deadwood, I would say the two things I drew on most were the mask work we did in school, where you'd sort of put on a mask and see who was looking back at you in the mirror, and then find a voice and a posture and for what might inhabit that mask. And it would sometimes feel as if a student was possessed by the mask they were wearing. Their body and voice and everything would transform so much. And once I found Jane in the mirror, this is in the audition phase, I sort of went into her what I was seeing looking back at me. And I had built what I was seeing in the mirror off of a series of still images, obviously, that I had found online, because there would be no moving images of her. But that extremely masculine mask that was on the face I saw on the screen was what I tried to construct in the mirror with various costume pieces and stuff involved, and then I tried to feel what she would sound like and move like, and that grew, obviously, once I had the part and was working. That grew over the course of playing her season by season, and I would even pick up things about David Milch's physicality that I would put into the character. I was sort of grabbing from anywhere I could sort of feel her, and because David had a version of each character in his body too. If he would sort of become Jane for a moment, I would see her in him, and then I would begin to find ways to do her as him, and I was just constantly pulling. So that's very much an example of kind of an outside in. And then when I talked about the way the mind needs to trick the body, I didn't want it to be a surface rendition of this person. I knew I had to drop fully into the thing I had sort of created in the mirror. And for that, I drew on largely on Grotowski. I don't know if you know about Grotowski, but it's just it's purely physical work, and I had gone deep into it after I'd gotten out of graduate school. It wasn't taught in school, but I did a workshop with Andre Gregory, and Ayad Akhtar, who's now primarily a playwright, was at that time, and maybe he still does workshops, was teaching the Grotowski method. He'd studied with Grotowski, and he was working with Andre. And it's a lot of flinging your body around in a room. It's a lot of nonsense, really. And it's not poetic, and it's not beautiful, and you're not making shapes in space or anything like that. You're really waking your body up, and it's visceral and it's kind of extreme. It's like if you think of every part of your body as having a limit, like your hand can only bend in half so far. I mean, if you're double jointed, maybe it can bend even further. But every joint in your body has a place where it sort of stops, depending on how limber you are. But really, you can't push your arm forward any further than the bones connecting your arm to your forearm, will allow. And the Grotowski method, you're kind of touching the places where your body stops of its own, and then you're just kind of flinging yourself at those limits over a period of working the plastiques, which is what the individual movements are. Anyway, to me, it wakes up something in you, which is kind of like, this was for me, almost a spiritual hunger. You're constantly feeling where your body stops, and something else wakes up that wants to go past where your body can go in space. And you get a kind of a hunger, and it gives you a kind of bigger energy. Because I knew she had to have a size to her, Jane. I felt like I had to wake up that hunger for filling a bigger space that was organic, as opposed to somebody just sort of shouting a lot, And if the Deadwood movie ever happens that's been talked about, I'd have to enter that again. I'd have to find it anew, because it really was, the first season of Deadwood especially, I didn't trust that I could hold on to that without feeling like a kind of an exaggerated person. So I would stay in that state for very long periods of time, and before every scene, I'd be doing weird plastiques out on the road there, hopefully as out of view of other people as I could manage, just to kind of bring my body into, again, that space. So that is all of that was just for that particular character. More recently than this Dr. Reisman character on Big Little Lies, I just learned the lines, and was entirely dependent on Nicole. It's like the thoughts I was thinking were, how do I speak to her right now where I don't trigger a fight or flight response? Mm-hmm. They were therapist thoughts. That's all I can say. It was like I wasn't thinking about acting in a scene. I tried to get the lines as in myself as I could, so I wasn't thinking about line. And then I tried to open myself to the project of working with this person who was in such denial and let everything be geared towards her. So it was a totally dependent performance. And it was just my great good fortune there that she was as dropped in as she was. There was something extraordinary happening with her, and we just don't question where these things come from. I mean, she brought that character fully into the room, and actually Alex did too. I mean, the at least in the scene with me that he was in, the blushing, truthful, sort of vulnerable person who sat in front of me, who my instinct told me probably abused his wife, created this kind of jangling set of conflicting responses for me, and I just let that be the case. I mean, I just opened myself to what they were doing. So that was like zero of the kind of preparation I'm talking about, having gone on for Jane. I didn't make myself anything. And the part that I just did in England that I was talking about, which was, that's going to hopefully come out in the States later this summer because the Weinstein Company picked it up. It's a series for British TV, but I think it's going to be here as well, called Fearless. She's a CIA operative, and I actually spent the whole time we were shooting it unsure if I was playing a sociopath or if I was playing a person who was totally owned by a corrupt system. And I kind of made that radical choice of leaving it up to the editors, really, to decide which way they were going to skew it, because take by take I felt like I was walking a little this side or that side of that choice. I didn't decide, and I decided not to decide. She certainly could do what sociopaths do, which is deploy her personality. Mm. She knew well enough how she came across that she could have an agenda in mind that had no humanism in it whatsoever, no compassion, no anything other than I need to accomplish this. Cold, calculated agenda. But she could deploy, if necessary, a very warm and engaging personality to accomplish that. To me, that's a sociopathic trait. Mm-hmm. But it's not entirely alien to people who are just trying to make their way through the world in life either.
Sure.
We, and actors especially, are familiar with that weird thing of you turn on, the version of you that does this, and you turn it on for this given situation. And you're not actually even sure if you're genuine at a certain point because you're so adept at performing you. And it was a creepy thing to occupy that weird space for 3.5 months to play that character, because it does make you wonder creepy things about yourself,
You do watch sort of the press line sometimes, and that version of, you do see people giving the performance version of themselves. It's so, and that's such a...
Well, we're so used, now the culture has become one where everybody is expected to be an actor and everybody's expected to be a director and everything, because we have this tool in our hands that does all of it. Mm-hmm. We can record ourselves, we can record our friends, we can post it on YouTube, and we've made a movie. And everybody's doing it all the time. So everybody is starting to develop these questionable talents that we have also developed. And you see this sort of sense, I mean, talk about alternate reality or alternate facts. The fact that everybody now knows how to perform a version of themselves that they think is presentable enough to post. Everybody's starting to experience that weird split that artists do. Who am I really? Who am I really? And you notice that there's a certain genre that's become very popular right now, which is like a version of the whodunit, but where the actual mystery is. I mean, Big Little Lies was something like that, where it's a whodunit, but the real question is, who are these people really? And you want to see the layers peeled back. And the true mystery, you're solving a crime, but the true mystery, what was that wonderful one where, I mean, there have been documentaries like this. The murderer.
The Jinx?
Well, Jinx was an example. And I'm thinking of the one where there was a guy who was accused of murder, and he was supposed to rape and murder, and his retarded younger relative was supposed to have done it with him. Yes, that one. And the whole time you're like, yes. Who did it? Was it done by him? But soon after you get engaged by that kind of intellectual question, you're engaged much more emotionally by the psychology of the town and the people and who are they? And I think it's because we're deeply asking that question of ourselves right now. Who are we? Are we good or are we sort of evil? Or what is our agenda in the world? And do we have one anymore? And there's a lot of cultural questioning going on right now in America, I think. And probably, if you think of Brexit, the same is going on in the UK. What are we right now? What have we become? What were we? What led to this?
And what do you think is the value then of acting, of actors, of doing that as a profession?
Well, it's interesting because, what I would have answered and what I still believe, but it's more complicated by this that I'm talking to you about right now. But I guess what I would have answered when I started out acting is that it's about compassion. That we bring our compassion to these characters or these situations, and that in doing so we wake up the potential for compassion in the viewer. And because compassion is so essential to the collective, that it's really a pretty important function that we have. It's just that entertainment has changed so much since I sort of started to fall in love with this and let myself fall in love with it, which was not till sort of after college where I thought, maybe some good can truly come of this and it's not just vanity, because for a while that's why I was holding back, is I just thought I can't be this vain person. Yuck. Isn't there anything else I can do that actually helps people? That's what I was thinking for a long time. So why it's complicated now is this crazy industry that incorporates people who are invested in this art form, incorporates so many other people now who have so many different investments, and corporate thinking has taken over almost every arena now, and it's no surprise that it's also taken over our arena. I find it difficult myself to resist the temptation to, just try to pursue whatever would have the biggest paycheck attached to it. And, that's out there for everybody. And in a successful career, I do think you have to do some jobs like that. And then you have to balance. Yeah, and you have to, it's not like it's evil. But I don't know, it's actually a more complicated question for me now than it was. The purity of that question, or the purity of my answer when I first started out, that I guess it's changed a little over time, and I have to think about it more now.
A lot of actors struggle with. I really do, especially as time goes on. I think.
And then I also see what happens to people who are usually extremely gifted, just as gifted, if not more gifted, than the people who experience some success. I see what happens, the corrosive effects of not experiencing enough success over time, and how that eats people up alive. And it's really rough what goes on when you've devoted yourself to something this demanding and it doesn't bear fruit. It's, I think it's deeply corrosive when that happens to people. So it's a risky thing to enter as a profession. And it's very difficult to figure out what's the point at which I need to call it for someone who's having that experience too. When do I just say enough is enough of this kind of energy? And then there are the liabilities of success, which is that the corporate monster just sort of sits at your door waiting to engulf you. And then half the time you're like, please come in, take me.
Yeah. Remember last year when I said I didn't want to be engulfed?
Yeah. It's, there's a lot of challenges to the soul of doing this work. I mean, it's really challenging.
How do you, I think the hardest thing for a lot of actors is when they're not working. How do you fill your time? And how do you continue to kind of, feel creative or feel like you're moving forward when you're not working?
Well, I'm sure you found this too, because you also write. But there's a really happy marriage between acting and writing, if you're drawn to doing that. Because if you have a writing project going, even one that may never see the light of day, but if you have something you're passionate about going, then as soon as the job ends, you have this, oh, thank God, I get to dive back into that again sort of feeling. And that's the space I'm in right now. I mean, it's been, knock wood, a good number of months of unremitting work recently. And maybe that's making me feel more grateful for this time. But I really do have something that I'm working with a writing partner that I put down a couple of years ago, and we sort of hammered out a pilot before we were ready to really do the pilot. It's such a big idea, and the pilot had too much in it. But returning to it now, well, no, it's okay. But if you think of The Godfather, it's a version of a big landscape story like that, but that's matrilineal. It's sort of a dynastic crime drama, but it's to do with the Russians, when we researched and wrote and put it down. It was a very different political moment than it is right now, and I actually think it's much more timely now than it was when we first conceived of it. It's funny because there were these books, in particular this book, Putin's Kleptocracy by Karen Dawisha, that have become like really important books. I mean, even in terms of the, when people are being questioned now, they're being questioned, about what may or may not have gone on with Trump. They're being questioned based upon things that are written in the books that I read just some years ago, just to do research for this project. So there was clearly something in the air then that now feels sort of zeitgeisty, which is why I want to return to it. It's really fun to work on right now. And when I was in New York doing this play just now, for the first time in my life, my career, there was it was called How to Transcend a Happy Marriage. It was a play by Sarah Rule at Lincoln Center, new play, with Marissa Tomei. It was a lot of fun. It was about polyamory and animal slaughter. But during the time I was in New York, this production company reached out to take a general with me. I've never done that before, and they basically said, we'd love to develop something with you if you have something. It was one of those sort of like, well, no, it's what got me back into thinking about and working on this, because I didn't pitch it, but I sort of said the basics, which I have not said here, but I sort of said the basics of what the idea is, just because I'm being protective of the idea until it's really, but she sort of lit up when I said it, and I wasn't consciously pitching it. I was just saying, well, this was a thing we put in a drawer a couple of years ago. So she liked the idea enough that it encouraged me to get back into it. So that's what I'm working on right now. Generating one's own work gets more appealing as you get older, too. I saw that with I mean, you can see with Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman on this project, they made that happen. I mean, they brought together all the talent to make it happen, and it was really Reese who spearheaded it and brought Nicole in too. So she just optioned the book and she did the stuff. And I mean, if women who are in their late 40s on up are inclined to do this, there will be more stories about women who are not 30 anymore. And I also think we desperately need that culturally. We need a woman's point of view to more and more penetrate the collective consciousness. I mean, even women who have been successful creators have largely been drawn to the old male narrative because that's what's been selling. I mean, I love the movie Hurt Locker, for example. It's very much a man's story, but you can feel that it's told with a sort of a female lens. Like, you get the interior life of these characters much more than you would in the typical war movie. But still, it's like these success stories of women who have sort of broken through. The women who have broken through with stories that are about women, especially women of a certain age, used to be few and far between. There's just more and more and more of that right now. And I'm so encouraged by that. And I do think there's a real call to do that, not just artistically, but I think social good will come of that cumulatively, because we're so hyper-masculinized as a culture right now. It's so extreme, isn't it? I mean, I'm amazed. This sort of old cowboy thing has come back in spades, and it's like rough and crude and weird. It doesn't feel even recognizable at the moment, kind of the level of hostility that's in the air. And I think one reason maybe why Big Little Lies was had such a nerve, I didn't actually, even though there were stars involved, expect it to be as popular as it was, is that what's it about? Well, really, a bunch of women nearly telepathically managed to get together in spite of their competitiveness with one another and just get rid of the bully. It's not even about who pushed. It's just that they collectively knew that was intolerable. And there's something about the feeling of that kind of collective power of womanhood that's very much in the air right now. And I think it will be a good creative time for women if we can embrace the challenge of being primary creators as opposed to just secondary creator, not just, but interpreters. If we can actually try to make the material. So I feel inspired to try to do that. It doesn't mean I'll succeed, but I do feel kind of this is the moment to try to do that. And it's nerve-wracking and exciting and challenging and all the rest of it, And I feel very lucky that this career has worked out to the extent it has. I mean, I didn't really expect that I would have a career in Los Angeles, for example. I thought I would stay on stage in New York, and that would probably be, and maybe make a little here and there doing a guest turn or something like that, but that I would mostly have a career in the theater. And a lot of my friends I love and admire are doing that. Just because I always thought of this as the land of the beautiful people. And I really did. I sort of thought that's for... Beautiful. Well, no, but what a kind of beautiful person, the ingenue, like where you're either going to have a career in athletics or you're going to get lucky and get an acting break. But that I always felt like LA was the place for that. And I still feel that way sometimes when I go to the gym. I'm like, these people are preternaturally beautiful. How does this happen? It's like they're sweating and everything, and they look amazing. It just is. I mean, people are beautiful here. But somehow, through playing a very homely character, actually, ironically, the door to working here, or working, I guess I should say, in film and TV really opened up for me, whatever it was now, more than a decade ago. So...
It's so true. Actors are so... I think actors are sensitive, and it is funny how those sort of outside, cosmetic things, or a comment a casting director will say to you once, it'll years you'll hold it inside of you. It's like it's so interesting that even it's bullshit sometimes. What
you get told and think is true, you have to remember who's talking with you. It's somebody whose job is to figure out how to sell you. And so they need to look at you in this commodified way. I mean, and maybe their mistake is that they're sharing it with you. It actually has nothing to do with you or whether you'll work. They're sort of speaking out loud, like, what box do I put you in? Because I need to be able to begin to sell you. Like your first jobs have to come from something that is kind of like the language is the language of the market, is I guess what I would say. But it's not at all predictive of what will happen to you once you do begin to work. And therefore shouldn't impact your feeling of it yourself at all. It's that leave them to think about whether you are the this or the that box that they want to try to put you in. And they need to think, like, don't judge them for it either. They need to think in this way because their job is to sell you.
Right, you could be angry at your
but you are, yeah, well, no, but I also don't even think take it in enough to let your feelings be heard. And what you have to offer ultimately will have nothing to do with that either. It will have to do with an interior life that's right now, if you haven't worked enough as an actor, probably somewhat opaque to everybody still because they can't see through the veneer of you to what you really do have to offer. And if you can kind of just sit upon your knowledge of what's still invisible, that's the energy that will propel you forward. It's actually what they don't see, not what they're saying to you, are you this, are you that? It's irrelevant. It's what they don't see and can't see because they're not artists like you. That will ultimately be the thing that you succeed with. So if you can just get in alignment with that.
Do you like to audition?
When you've had a good audition, you always know that something did happen in the room that mattered to you and mattered to the casting director and mattered to who, and whether you get the job or not, the challenge is to let that be enough. That something happened in the room that was good. And that's just what it is. You might be too tall, too short, too this, too that, too whatever, and the part might need to go to a star, and it might be whatever. But you can still try to create that experience, both for yourself and whoever the person is, and then their associate who's working the camera. Just let that be enough. And that's the great challenge of the art of auditioning, I think. And you could even take the mental challenge a step further and think, if there are directors in the room who are there to see your work, that this person might be somebody that it would be really good for you to collaborate with, and you're going to see. Not just they're going to see if you might be good to collaborate with, but you're going to kind of see and feel whether they might be nice to collaborate with. Anything that can take the scenario away from your sitting in a place just to be judged. And the best you can do is not be judged poorly. There's something else that's possible. And it's just like a piece of work you can do to try to let the audition scenario be that.
Do you read reviews?
Every time, good or bad, whatever it might be. Partly because I'm putting myself to the test of that not being the deepest truth of what I'm doing. So I take all the external things in so that I can neutralize them for myself. Because if not, what I'm doing is the work of imagining what they might be, and then they start to come from me. And my own inner demons will come out to play. If it's just this many words, and they're just this insulting, or just this complimentary, whatever they might be, and they lift me up that much or take me down that much, it's quantifiable. And I can take that hit and go and do the correction necessary and come back to myself. I know that's really different from a lot of actors.
No, I think that's...
But I don't want to be up against my own demons because I'm caring more about how I'm registering in relation to myself than I am this other thing. And I'm wanting to take the power away from it, actually by engaging it, not by sort of hiding from it and making it bigger than it is.
Conversations with Actors is produced by me, Vivian Kerr. You can find out more about our guests at conversationswithactors.com. Please rate us in iTunes if you have a moment and hit subscribe. You can reach me at conversationswithactors@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments. Thank you very much for listening.